file in the database with no relationships. Check in another file, got to have another file with no relationships. Now I go set the relationships, and what that does is it go into those database metadata entries and changes the relationships, adds the relationships, okay? That's why you have an open check-in, to make that easy and flexible, okay?
So the children means that the file that the parent dependent on.
Yeah. So a file has a bunch of relationships, and what each relationship means is I depend on that other file. Okay? Right?
So the children means all the files that the parent dependent on.
The children means all the files that the file that has the children depends on. Yes. Okay? Yep.
What about the namespace? Do we need to use the namespace in different directories?
So this design here, I mean, one design could be to have a different directory for each namespace. I don't think I would do that. You know, the namespace is just an extended name. What I would do is, when I checked in something, I would have the user supply both a namespace and a file name. And if, you know, and so if that file already exists in the repository but with a different namespace, then this is starting a new version chain, okay? It's a new file. So think of the namespace : file name as the name. That's what I do, okay? And so what I would do is I would, maybe in my GUI, in my check-in GUI, I would have a namespace and I'd have namespace and a name, and I would refuse to check it in until the user puts something for the namespace. But it ought to be the real, whatever namespace that file belongs to. It really ought to be that namespace. Okay. Other questions about Project 4?
What about the requirement about display all the files that have no parents?
Yep.
Does that mean to display all the files that will not be dependent on other files?
No, it means just the opposite. It means show all the files that no other file depends on. Yeah, Gabe.
Is that something we could just build like a specified query for and show it in the query thing as a test?
I left that, how you demonstrated that, up to you. Frankly, I think that's a great way to display stuff when you open up. If you have lots and lots and lots of things in the repository, those files that have no parents are the top node, okay? And there might be 400 files below them that they, transitively depend on, okay? And so, you've narrowed down this 10,000 files in the repository to maybe a few hundred, just, top level stuff, and it makes it really easy to navigate. I think I would probably, I'm going to build out my own Project 4 this summer, and I think my default view will open up with files that have no parents. So, my model is that I will provide several different views: a view for files that have no parents, a namespace-oriented view, a category-oriented view. So I might have. I talked about super nodes. When I talked about adding the NoSQL database, I said I just did this super node that isn't really a file. I would. I would probably have a bunch of those super nodes defined, for each project. Project 4, Project 3, Project 2. Project 4 isn't a file, okay? That super node is sort of like this, represents the solution. It's just pulling everything together, okay? So, did I answer the question? No obligation to, you know, I've left, I really want to leave the design up to you. No penalty for doing it some other way. You're absolutely not responsible for implementing what I have in my head and have only partly disclosed to you. You just, I just want you to do your own designs. Yes?
Should we specify the number of category? Let the client choose one of them? Or
you could, and I would accept that. Myself, I wouldn't do that. I would let the clients create new categories if they wanted to, but I would certainly, you want to let them select categories, existing categories, but I would let them add new categories if they wanted to. But what I wouldn't do is I wouldn't allow them to create new directories. Okay. Now, again, you might, after, you know, if you were using this repository for a project that had 200 developers on the team, you might discover that the categories got to be chaotic. There were so many of them, and you might change that policy. But I think it's a very reasonable default policy. Let the user create categories. Don't let the user create directories. Other questions?
For browsing, so is that okay that I'd let the user to input some conditions and then display all the files that meet this requirement? And
You could.
should we just list
You
the
could.
name, or we should list the metadata about this name?
You probably don't want to list all the metadata, but in my, again, as I build this out this summer, I think in the browse view what I will do, you know, I double clicked on the file and I show the code. What I would show is the code, and then a pane below it, the description, and then links. It's child links, some way to navigate down to the children. Okay. How that links, I'm not expecting you guys to have links on those browsing, but if you do, it's great. But that would make browsing very effective. Now I can I can display the files that have no children, and then I can click down and click down through the children as I'm learning about what's there. Okay.
But the basic purpose is to find the files that meet the query requirement.
A lot of the time it is, but not always. Sometimes, again, I think probably I would wind up doing searches probably more than half the time just by going to the top level ones and navigating down through the relationships. Okay. The less you know, the more likely you're going to use queries. Certainly, querying is part of that recipe. It would be okay to have a few canned queries, you know, fixed queries would be okay. I think it would be nice to develop a query builder that let the user, but that's hard. You know, being that flexible is hard, and I'm not expecting anybody to do it. I'm going to think about that a lot this summer, and may well do that in my own build out of the Project 4, but you know, I'm not expecting people to do that. Other questions? Wei Heng, how you doing? You got questions? No questions? Okay. Doing all right? Project 4 coming along well?
Maybe.
Maybe. You know when you get it back, huh? By the way, my game plan is to hand back projects tomorrow in the help session. I'm not sure that the TAs will be fully done grading, but I'm going to hand back whatever I have, and also I got to have time. I'm going to pick them up 5 o'clock tomorrow night, and between then and 9 o'clock the next morning, I've got to look at them and record them, and so, you know, whether I get through all of them or not, I don't know. But any that aren't ready to come back will be available on Tuesday. Okay. So.
I provide storage for a client, but if I want to check in, for example, 8.1 to check out it, and next time I check out 8.2,
So understand, I would absolutely never transfer a version file to the client. I think what the repository should do is strip off the version numbers from the file when he hands it back to the client. The client knows what he picked. He said, give me tokenizer version 3. But he gets back tokenizer.h and tokenizer.cpp. Okay? That's what I would do. You know, because it'll never build. If you give them stuff with version numbers, then the pound includes will all fail because the pound includes don't have version numbers on them. Okay? So I would have any file that gets transferred from the repository to the client comes with a version number stripped off. And the client doesn't make version numbers. The client must not do that. The repository makes version numbers. So you send to the repository a file without a version, and the repository decides how to version it. In other words, do I have this file already in the database? Is there a key that matches this namespace : file name? And if there is, then what's the latest version, and is it open or closed? If it's closed, I create a new version number. If it's open, I give the file the same version number and I overwrite the one that was in there before. Okay.
If a client wants to close or open the file, checking file, so he could only make a request to the repository.
Yeah. The client makes a request to the repository. So the repository has to show the clients which one are open and closed. There has to be a way for a client to find out what's open and closed. Okay. And you can do that in the browse pane. You know, you could just have a little close or open. Okay. One way to do it. Okay.
The repository will check if the request is made by the file author of the file too.
Yeah. And if it isn't, it just fails the check-in. Throws away the file, you know, and refuses the check-in. Other questions about Project 4? Any questions about midterm makeup? There's one very obvious question about midterm makeup that nobody's asking, maybe because people haven't looked at it yet. But somebody asked in the 8 o'clock section, let me pull that up and make a comment about it. This first one, implement a thread-safe vector that provides the same functionality as the standard vector but supports safe read and write access. So I think almost certainly you're going to use the standard vector to implement the storage. I'm not expecting you to expose to the client every single feature that the standard vector does. I think, you know, a perfectly satisfactory answer would be to have push back, pop back, insert, and iterate, okay, index. And the student this morning said, can we do that by inheritance? Well, if you inherit from vector, there's two issues. The one issue is that vector doesn't have a virtual destructor, and so you know you could have problems if you store it on the heap. But the worst problem is that if you inherit from it, there's no way to make it thread safe because you're exposing those vector methods, and the vector methods are not thread safe. So what you have to do is you have to have methods that delegate down to that vector, and it takes a lock as it before it makes that delegating call and releases the lock on the way back. Okay, so you know, a small set of the vector, I would make a vector just a data member of your thread safe vector class. Your thread safe vector class needs to be templatized on the, you know, but then, you know, it just exposes those few methods and you make those few methods thread safe. And that would be a perfectly satisfactory answer. I think that's the one most likely to cause people to go astray. So, any other questions about the midterm makeup? If not, I will start talking about cross-platform development. Okay, let's talk about cross-platform. By the way, there will be a help session tomorrow. Just one. There won't be two waves. Just one starting at 9 o'clock. And you know, I'll answer. My primary intent is to answer questions about Project 4 and the midterm makeup. So what you'll discover is that once Tuesday is come and gone, you won't get hardly any help out of either the TAs or me for a late Project 4 or for the midterm makeup. Not because we don't want to give you help, but we're going to be up to here grading, okay? So I won't be looking at Piazza. I won't be answering my email. Nothing until my grades are turned in the Tuesday after graduation. So if you've got questions, you really want to ask them today, Friday, or Tuesday. What's on the agenda for Tuesday is it's traditional for me to talk a little bit about where do you go from here, what resources are available to you for you to keep growing with C++ and, you know, keep your skills sharp and so on. We'll talk about that a little bit. There's several people in the C++ community that I admire, and we're going to talk about them a little bit and take a quick look at a couple of their videos and stuff. Okay, so I want to talk about cross-platform development. So before I do this, let's go to cppreference.com. Right here, you'll notice this is the home page. Right here is a compiler support. Let's click on that. And this chart is for C++2A, meaning 20 or 21 or 22, whenever it finally gets ratified. It's the thing that the Standards Committee is in the throes of working vigorously on. C++ 11 is a fait accompli. We're using it now. C++ 14 is a fait accompli. Visual Studio by default doesn't compile against C++ 14, but I'll show you how to do it. And all of the three major compilers you're likely to use when you do cross-platform development support C++ 14, and they all support C++ 17. C++ 17 has been ratified but not made official yet. There's some paperwork that's kind of working its way through. It'll be any day now. It'll be the official standard. C++ 20, there's a lot of stuff that's coming. On Tuesday, I'll talk a little bit about some of the stuff that's coming with the new standard. But right now, you can see, here's GCC and Clang and Microsoft Visual C++, and Microsoft Visual hasn't implemented any of the 20 standards. I think they have in one of their experimental builds, but nothing that's available as of now that I know of. All three have implemented almost all of 17. Visual Studio is the only one who's implemented all of it. Almost all of them have implemented almost all of C++14, and all of them have implemented all except for this one, dynamic pointer safety, blah, 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 implemented this. So now the model is, you know, C++, almost every platform has a C++ compiler. So if you can write code in C++, you can write quick, clean code on almost any platform. I think probably the Raspberry Pi doesn't have a C++ compiler. I don't know for sure, but it's kind of a small, not horribly powerful machine. Probably doesn't. Okay, not enough audience for somebody to spend all the effort to build one. But just about all the other platforms do. And you say, great, I can just write my code once and run it everywhere. And that's almost true. The students in distributed objects do a bunch of projects, pretty much of their own choosing. I have a project list, and you know they can pick one of the list or do another project of their own choosing. Two of the students are doing projects, slightly different projects, that both involve porting my sockets library to Linux. And they both hit this compile error that was really weird with G++. Compiles just fine with C++, well, with Visual Studio. But with G++, they got this really strange error. And I suggested they try Clang, and one of them tried it and also got the same error. It turns out that I am passing a callable object through a chain of calls, and what I'm passing doesn't have a copy constructor. It has a move constructor, and the idea is we're moving that socket. And one of the calls in that chain I had listed as a reference, not by value. When you expect to do moves, you want to, the way moves work, they move through a pass by value call. That's what triggers the move. If you're passing a temporary that provides move constructor, then, and when you pass it by value, the move constructor will be called. So, you know, in one place I had a pass by reference accidentally, and G++ was complaining about that. Said, hey, with very weird, you know, the error messages had nothing to do with the real problem, but Visual Studio compiled it just fine. And really, I think Visual Studio shouldn't have. I made that one change and it compiles just fine. So the moral of the story is that probably for 80 to 90% of the code you write, if it compiles on one platform, it'll compile on the other platform. The other 20%, there's some little tiny differences of the way those compilers are interpreting the standard, okay, that can cause a problem. But basically, that's the idea. And I think it's a good thing to have a little bit of experience with C++ on other platforms, because it opens up your market. When you're applying for jobs, there are quite a few companies that are building out on Linux and Macs and stuff like that. And if you have C++ experience limited to Windows, those opportunities may not be available to you. But if you have a little bit of G++ on Linux experience, then those opportunities open up. So I think it's a good idea to do a little bit of that. And this summer, you know, might be an excellent time to. I'm going to be doing it this summer. So if you're participating in the summer projects meeting, you'll see me do it, and it's a great time for you to do a little bit of that yourself. Okay. So now let's go back to, so here I have I'm using VirtualBox, and I'll talk about it a little bit. So I'm running Linux in a virtual machine on this laptop, and I do the same thing at home, and on my development machine at home, this is very responsive. The Dropbox and Linux are very, very quick, very responsive. They're not on this machine. Partly because I have limited disk space on this machine, so I limited the size of my virtual machine. You know, when you create a virtual machine, you tell it how much disk access you want it to have available to it and so on. And this guy is kind of cramped for space, and I think it's thrashing on page faults because it doesn't have enough space. So it's really not very responsive. It's okay for doing demos, but I absolutely would not do design on this laptop. But again, you know, working at home is just fine. But you'll notice so what I want to do is talk a little bit about Visual Studio Code. So, and you can see, you know, it's not very responsive. Okay, that's because it's, you know, it's just not, it's throttled. But anyway, Visual Studio Code is not Visual Studio like we know it. It was written by Microsoft people, I believe by the same people that wrote Visual Studio, but it's absolutely not Visual Studio. There's some parts of it that are sort of, you know, vaguely like Visual Studio, but a lot of it is not at all. I think this was built on the Electron framework. The Electron framework is a JavaScript framework for building desktop applications, including GUI applications. Really nice framework. Electron uses and expects you to use MongoDB. MongoDB is a NoSQL database that stores its data in JSON, JavaScript object notation. And so, because Mongo stores in JSON, Mongo is a very natural way of storing stuff in a JavaScript framework. Okay? So, I believe that this was built with Electron. And if you look at, it's very configurable. The good news is it's very configurable. The bad news is it's very configurable. So here's a task.json. And what you can see is that basically you can define an array of tasks and the label is, you know, you'll select which task you want to run by the label, okay? So make explicit clients, make file system. Now, this guy is an IDE. He doesn't have a build system behind him. He expects you to supply your own tool chain. And I'm using the GCC tool chain, G++ and GDB and, you know, and so on. It doesn't have any notion of solutions or projects, but it works really well with makefiles because G++ works really well with makefiles, okay? If you haven't used makefiles, you ought to play around with it a little bit. Make is interesting. Make does the same kind of things that Microsoft Build does. You could create a structure for a project you're developing that holds on to many different files and, you know, has different categories, you know, you can have different parts like, you know, a database and this and that and the other thing. Make, what it does when you run make is it uses time date stamps to decide what it's going to compile, what it's going to build, and what it won't. And you can configure it so that that works at the compile level, and then that works at the linker level, and so on. And what I'm doing here is I'm running a makefile, and I'll show you an example of a really simple little makefile. Example of a makefile. So the way this works is for each project you handcraft a makefile, but then all through the development you don't have to do anything except if you add a new file, then you got to add that into your makefile. But that's really easy to do, simple to do. So here there's this JSON configuration, and so now let's just so I'm running Ubuntu 16.04, which used Unity interface, which most people hate. I don't like it. What Unity interface does is you say, where's all my menu items? All my menu items for this application are right here. And every time you put a different application in focus, it puts those, you don't expect them to be there. You expect this to be Linux menu and to have the application menus here, but that isn't the way Unity works. Unity steals that menu bar and puts the application menus up there. Why they did that is totally beyond me, but they did it. So anyway, and they're going to change it. In the next version of Ubuntu, they're going to get rid of Unity because everybody hated it, and they're going to go back to GNOME. But anyway, so here if I click on tasks, you'll see, I'm going to say run build task, and you'll see a menu. Here's a menu, and these are, here is make explicit clients, here's this label. Make file system, here's this label. So I can pick my labeled tasks. And so let's just make this client. And now GCC ran, and it said, I don't have anything to do because it's all been built. You haven't changed it since I built it, so I'm not going to build it again. And now I can run it. It's got a built-in run facility. So here, I just say start without debugging. And it takes a while because this machine is throttled. At home, it just pops right up, but on my big development machine. But here it'll take, here it is. Here it is. So it ran. So this happened to be a little dummy demo test that I did for distributed objects. But I'm compiling, I'm building a DLL, and I'm loading it into a host. Really trivial little DLL, but I'm loading it into a host. So the development model here is that as you begin using Visual Studio Code, you configure tasks. You kind of learn what you want to do. You configure tasks, and then from then on, all you're doing as you're doing new developments is creating a makefile for each development. Okay, and you're doing all the editing directly in Visual Studio Code. And the nice thing about it is it runs everywhere. So Visual Studio Code runs on Linux, on Windows, on Macs, right out of the box. All you got to do is download it, and it works exactly the same way. So I don't think I would replace Visual Studio with this. Okay, but I think the development style. It works just about as efficiently as using Visual Studio. I've done a little bit of Linux development, and there's other facilities in Linux. There's NetBeans, designed to build Java, but you can build C++ with NetBeans. I find it clunky and aggravating to use. It works, it has a debugger. It works a lot more like Visual Studio in the sense that you build a project in the IDE instead of editing a makefile. but it's kind of clunky. Even less, there's a Eclipse, another common IDE, which was designed by IBM to build Java, but has C++ capability. And it's even clunkier, and every time Eclipse changes its version, it moves everything around. So all that stuff, you knew where it was, you knew how to get to, you can't get to it anymore. You have no idea where it is, and you spend a morning finding out where everything is so you can start working again. Okay. So several years ago, I uninstalled my last ever version of Eclipse. I will never use Eclipse again, and I'll probably never use NetBeans again because I really like Visual Studio Code. I think it's a pretty nice development environment. So the moral of the story is, I think it's a good idea for you to have some C++ development on Linux experience, even if it's not a whole lot, to put on your resume. And the fact that you know a little bit about, you can use VS Code. The interviewers will know what that is. If they're C++ people, they'll know what that is. And that'll open up a few niches for you, some jobs that wouldn't be available to you otherwise. So I think it's a good thing to do. And once you get used to it, development is just about as productive as it is with Visual Studio. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say about cross-platform development. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about the design principles, how the design principles we've talked about all semester long relate to. Let me try this one more time and see if I can get this thing to work, because I got something all set up here. DocCam, hello? Ah, we got focus. Earlier I couldn't get it in focus, now we got it in focus. So, okay. So, project 4, I want to talk about this. So this is my demo, basically. We might imagine that this is, I think this summer as I build out my version of project 4, it's going to use exactly the structure. I don't think I'll change this at all. So there's a bunch of principles we talked about. I think the most important one is the single responsibility principle. Most important single design principle. And that, of course, is not just OOD. It applies to virtually all software development. But here, very strong use of the single responsibility principle. So we have a GUI responsible for accepting input from the user and displaying output to the user. A native channel for sending messages back and forth, and a translator simply focused on doing nothing but translating messages from the managed world to the native world and from the native world back to the managed world, and it starts up COM. But that's all it does. Only thing this guy does. And the only thing this guy does is send messages. Files, but the files to send as messages. So, very single-minded focus. And there's something really great about that message handling. If we want to add new functionality to the system, we only have one message class, but we define the message in terms of the attributes it contains to support that particular task, and we add a client processing element and a server processing element, and we're done. We've added that without touching any of the other parts, absolutely untouched. So, very, very flexible. So, totally focused on giving information to the user and collecting information from the user, totally focused on translating information in the form of messages from the managed world to the native world and back, totally focused on sending messages from the client to the server, any number of servers. The server itself does almost nothing except dispatch messages. All of its real functionality is down here in these server procs. So if I want to add new functionality, design a new message, add a new client proc, add a new server proc, and I'm done. So not only is that single responsibility principle, there's another principle related to that, which is I am adding new code. I'm not modifying any code. Which principle was that? Open closed, yeah. So absolutely, this was designed to support the open and closed principle. The open and closed principle is the least structured of all the principles. It really doesn't tell you how to do what it's telling you to do. It doesn't tell you how. It's just setting this goal. But and we've been talking all semester long about a variety of ways to do that. Message passing, one way for distributed systems. Templates, one way for components, and so on. So, add processing, add a message, add processing. Haven't touched the GUI, haven't touched the translator, haven't touched COM, haven't touched the server, haven't touched the NoSQL database. Now, it's possible that I have had to touch the GUI, but the way that the GUI was designed with a tab for each activity and a control, the only thing in that tab is a control. There's no code in that tab, it's just a control. So now again, if I want to add new functionality, if it causes the GUI to change, it's going to change by adding a new tab and a new control in that tab. Okay? Really, really strong implementation of the open and closed principle. Dependency inversion principle. Have we used the dependency inversion principle here anywhere? What is the dependency inversion principle? The shorthand is interfaces and object factories. Right? And we have used that. We wrote a COM wrapper that provided an interface and an object factory so that none of this native code leaked into the managed world. And that's essential. This would not work without that wrapper. Because this managed code cannot deal with native threads. It cannot deal with mutexes. It cannot deal with sockets, native sockets. If any of that implementation leaks into the managed world, it will fail to compile with a gazillion unreadable, ununderstandable error messages. Why did I get this error message? What does this mean? No one knows. It's that incompatibility between the managed world and the native world. And so we have an interface and an object factory. So here, let's switch this back to here is the COM library wrapper, and sure enough, here's our object factory Okay, it's returning this interface pointer. That's what a factory always does, is it returns a pointer to an interface, a pointer of the interface type. This pointer is bound to a concrete object, but the interface declaration has no native implementation at all. And as far as anybody that uses this factory, they just depend on that text. They don't, so totally. And if I go to the definition for this create function, not that definition, give me the other definition. If I go to the definition of this create function here, sure enough, I construct an endpoint. Now, new COM, I'm creating COM, and I return a pointer to that COM interface, return pcom. So this is my interface and object factory. And the interface is really simple. Here's the ICOM interface. Okay, create, get context, post message, get message, and about all, some of this stuff, I'm not using anywhere in this demo. All this set send file path, this doesn't actually work. Okay, I've hardwired in, I shouldn't, but this was a demo and I had to get it done quickly. I hardwired in some stuff that made it hard to change those paths. Again, in my build out this summer, my intent is to fix that. But anyway, the point is that interface and object factory has totally isolated the managed world from the unmanaged world. So open and close, dip, single responsibility, interface segregation principle. Have we used that? All over the place. So every one of these controls, I didn't show it here, but there's controls out here, there's for each tab there's a control. Each control has its own language to support what that tab needs to do. So I don't have one place where all that language is glommed together and I've separated out into these nice small responsibilities for each tab, a checkout language, check-in language, whatever. Single responsibility, again, each of these procs have their own language. It's really message language, okay? So for each proc, there's a message set of attributes. The language for those procs are the attributes in the message. So I've segregated out the language, so a whole bunch of them. I didn't stuff that all into one message. I allowed the message to take whatever procs it needed and made sure that the message processing would ignore anything that, it only looked for certain particular things. So interface segregation principle here, interface segregation principle across those tabs, interface segregation principle here in the NoSQL database. I have DB core, a language for doing the basic storage stuff, persist, a language for saving and retrieving databases, and query, a language for viewing information from the database. So that database language was factored into those three parts. List graph substitution principle is the last of the principles, and down here the NoSQL database uses the XML doc, and the XML doc uses XML elements, and the XML elements absolutely use list graph substitution principle. I have a single abstract XML element that provides the interface for tagged element, for comments, for declarations, for all of them. Okay. So every single one of those principles is used in multiple places across this design. I think this is a really nice vehicle for understanding how those principles affect your design. I think it's really worth your time and effort this summer. If you're going to participate in the summer projects meeting, I would strongly suggest, there's lots of interesting things to do, but I would strongly suggest you take your project 4, you think about, you look at this design, look at your project 4 design, take the best of both worlds. There's some stuff that you've done that's better than what I've done, that I'd like it. I'd probably adopt it myself, okay? So take the best of both of them and, rework your project into a really nice portfolio project that you can walk into an interview with and blow the interviewer out of the water. Wow, you did that? You got to be kidding me. They'll be impressed that in one semester you built a NoSQL database, you integrated a communication, message passing communication channel with a bunch of interesting processing in a repository, lots of interesting stuff. So I think it would be a really, really good idea to do that over the summer. Even if you're not going to participate in the summer projects meeting, to do it yourself. So, I know, summer's summer. You don't want to spend all summer working. You got to spend some time at the beach and, spend some time with your friends and maybe you're working, maybe you're in California, basking in the California sunshine and smog and heavy traffic and all that stuff, and raging wildfires and mudslides. But although I got to tell you, I would prefer raging wildfires and mudslides to snow and more snow and more snow. But anyway, so. There's a lot of instructional value in the design. To go back and look at it, look at your design again, look at this design, compare, decide for yourself what you think is good in your design, what you think is not so good, what you think is good in this demo, and what you think is not so good. But then not just look at it, but do something with it. Alrighty, I think I'm about done. Any questions? Issues? Yeah, Wei-Han.
So if a file is not closed, its status is not closed.
Right.
Can I select it as a dependency?
Yes, but you can't close that. You can only select it as a dependency if your check-in is open. Once your check-in is closed, it's immutable and you can't add new relationships to it. So when you're selecting it as a dependency, you can, but you can't close it until this one becomes closed. You can do a close pending, closing, but it can't be closed until this one is closed. Okay, make sense? Other questions? There will be a help session tomorrow, just one. I'm not going to do 2 waves. It'll start at 9 o'clock, and I'll be answering again questions about Project 4 and the midterm makeup. If anybody has questions about other topics, I'm always happy to discuss those. On Tuesday, again, I'll open the floor for questions about Project 4 and the midterm makeup, but mostly expecting to talk about where you go from here. If you really like C++ and you want to strengthen what you've learned in this class, There's a bunch of very good avenues, and I'll talk about that. I've been teaching a long time, 40 years, I think. I started as an adjunct in 1978, and I think that counts up to 40. And I think I do a pretty decent job of presenting. But there are a couple of guys in the C++ community, Herb Sutter and Andrei Alexandrescu, who I admire greatly. They are my model of a great presenter. And I will, on Tuesday, probably run, not the entire video, but some clips out of their videos at CPP-Com. And we'll also walk through CPP-Com, CPP-Con, C++ Conference is what it stands for. And there's a whole, every year there's one. We'll step through them and take a look at some things that I think are really worth looking at, you know, videos that are worth checking out, seeing for yourself. There's some that are inspirational for me, and some that are kind of boring but have a lot of good technical detail. So we'll talk about some of that. And I'll present some references and things like that that I think are good for moving on and getting more experience. And again, you know, this summer, if you're here and you want to participate in the summer projects meetings, great time to strengthen your skills. If there are no more questions, I'm done. So, final round, questions? Questions? Good, everybody's all ready to submit. Fantastic. I'm glad you're in such good shape. All righty. See you all either tomorrow or Tuesday. And tomorrow also, I'm going to pick up the grading, Project 3 grading from the TAs tonight. I don't know if they'll have all the projects graded. I hope they will, but I'm not sure they will. And then I take them home tonight, I look them over, and I record the grades. And I'm hoping that I'll get through all of what the TAs give me. And then tomorrow morning, I'll hand them back to anybody who's here. Anybody that can't pick them up or doesn't pick them up from the help session tomorrow can pick them up on Tuesday. By Tuesday, everything we have will be graded. Okay? Project Force won't. We do have a few Project Force in already. Alrighty, and there will be a grievance session tomorrow night at 5 o'clock. So if you come and pick up your projects, you can go grieve with the TA and say, wasn't fair. You didn't treat me fairly. Alrighty. See you all. Oh, did you get a Piazza email from me about the videos?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I will make links on the video page, but I haven't gotten to it yet, and I probably won't get to it until sometime this weekend. But you can find them all just by searching for the playlist CSE 687-OOD. They'll all be there. Oh, also, please submit course evaluations. I pay attention to them. I look at them. If you provide constructive criticism, I look at it very carefully. I have from time to time changed the course content. You know, if you say, I really like this about 687. I wish you'd done this a little differently, or a little more information here, or you talk too much about that. Better if you talk, you know. I look at all those very carefully and I think about it. That doesn't mean I always respond to them. I'll always get people who say, you're going too fast, and somebody else who says, you're going too slow. And so, you know, we can't do anything about that.
我感觉你这个好难，他的牌子是这个，我没写过。
我写的是，我是 create 一个文件，然后我这个的孩子全都给显示。
你说那个密码？
对。就是我现在只写了 create 的是我的文件，我这里包含这个的，我让它显示。
那
发上
会
文件，我把它所有的还能再有钱，
有可能
2倍。
但是已经注册好，那个号是应该有个全部
还是可以的。
如果说还可以，我那个可能文件本身没有 close， 我去的。
但是好像得。
他说，那你如果说你这个文件它是没有 close， 你就不能 close。他应该是不添加800个。modify 游戏直接新加。我直接加了一栏 modify metadata， 我 check in 直接不去添加技能。我直接加了一栏，不是好几栏嘛 ，check in check out， 我直接加了一栏 modify metadata， 然后我在这里面我就来那个是标准。
弄啥？越高越多。
我再去选中给它放到default了就好了。
Well, everything you check in should have metadata. Everything you check in should have metadata. So if you have older versions, you have
但是我一个 tab 并不够用啊，我必须得去另一个 tab 里做了这个取了名叫 modify。
Yeah, you know, if you put in a bunch of files just for
就把一个消息把我要把它的底层给发过去，
首先要把它那些 file
不输其他的，你光 check in。
I think you should go and put at least a little bit of metadata.
当然要输其他的了。
那个再输，这是你。
就
The best thing, you know, once you've got check
默认你不输值不就改它的题看看它是你光把 child 添
I
加
would
上
start checking something.
对是。
I would enter the database, I would delete everything from that, and now I would start checking.
又要需要，如果
So when you check in, that's just modify everything.
但是我如果想去删你的，
对啊，我也觉得是的。对啊，我觉得这是一个过程。他跟我说的是带丘的，对，把一堆带丘的再拆拼一堆带丘的，那不就相当于就是 modify relationship？ 是的。这是一个过程。
他的意思是一个过程。
不是，我的意思是一个 checking， 意思就是这全是 checking 写的呀，我不要单独再弄。
但是就是我手不用在那我得有一个按键嘛。
你先 check in 第一个 file 对吧？然后 check in 第二个 file，check in 第三个 file 对吧？然后你再 check in 第一个 file， 你给它添加的 relationship 不就相当于 modify 了吗？
哦，明白。是要分开写。
是没毛病。我感觉他的意思是这个。
我感觉他的意思是把文件发进去。
就是说，如果是我那个文件
这确实是这样
有
的情况下，
然后我其他的文件，
你刚才说的那个什么？
如果说我想把一个文件作为某个文件的一
应该是可以。
你指的依赖是
他说的是
对，它是要 close，然后我这 child 文件里面没有 close，那我这 parent 文件可以
open， 是可以添加 open 的 child， 但是你不能 close。
那你 close 不是直接添加了一个按键，select按键 close。
我觉得我想
open 的 child。
我不用 close，我也这么说，但是我在 modify 里设计的。
所以应该是这样，就是说。
checking 我不太明白 checking 的时候 close。
我就是咱俩想的不一样，
相当于
我选完了，就是可以可以在 checking 流程中去做这事儿。
Open checking 的条件太苛刻，然后 Close checking 的条件太宽松。
Close 是一个单哦，
是要 close 是一个单独，
然后你选中了以后，你
close。我没太明白，为啥要 checking 的时候可以完成？就你 checking 的时候，你 checking 它所有的 child 应该是有固定状态的，有的是 close， 有的。你的意思就是它的 children， 我觉得它的 children 是不是 close 无所谓吧？哦，不是，是这样子，是这意思啊，就是我 checking 这个 file， 我不是要给它选 children 吗？
对。
那这些 children 它 close 不 close 无所谓，因为我 checking 这次我又不 close， 我要 close 它的时候，我单独把它选中，然后点 close， 我发一个 close request， 对吧？这个时候它才要检验它的所有的 children 有没有 close。然后我想的就是 open 是一个按钮 ，close 也是按钮，就是
不能没有 open 的按钮。
为什么？
不能 modify 你已经 close 了，所以说要不然你又是 modify 了你这个
close， 应该没有，
你不能有open 的按钮。
哦，对，
你是不能 modify 那个。
因为我 checking 的时候它默认是 open， 然后它一旦 close 我也不能再 open 了。
对，要不然你这个 close。
因为我就是可以远程发 close 的。
对，可以发 close 就没事。
那不一定，那我 close 我也不一定成功呀。我 close 我只要就按照我那个流程就可以。
其实对，但是他那个
就是
不是他的意思是在 browse 里你可以 browse 所有文件的状态。
按照我现在这个，
我感觉
就是如果说我是一个
这个留下在这个位置
的时候，我
就打不着。
我可以在 modify 这边我只显示我没有 close 的问题。
巨人就算
完全不管这个，
我就不管这个。
因为其实确实不用
一个对
选的有点麻烦了，你写 test case 也麻烦。有道理。
这些都是你自己写的。
对，其实就 open 和 close 就可以了。
甚至你都不需要去管这个 requirement 都没有这个，你 case 里你都不需要写这个，你都已经。
但是你要 close 的，你现在要 close 一个，那你不是还得看它的 child close 吗？
那 child 没 close 没 close， 包括这个文件。
那没 close 你这个怎么 close？child 没 close 你这个。
但是我就算 close 这个，我仍然能去碰的 child， 所以并不影响。
对这个开箱的话，
有什么技巧？
那你这个 child 是 open 的，你这个就不可以 close 呀。
全凭你自己写的呀，你为什么就让
他会告诉你？
意思你就要 close 一个它的 child 都 close 的文件。
会告诉你下一个文件。他的意思是，就算我 child open， 我就把它的 child close。
他会告诉你完整数据。
能看出来的问题，我觉得。
那或者就是我
就是会显示你的那个。
那或者另一种设计就是，我现在我 close， 我显示我的这边是显示我的那个我选这个我要去 modify 这个文件，我只能选它是 open 的。我选这边 children， 我只能选这是 close 的。如果说它没有，如果说
你的 modify 就是添加 children 是吧？
说添加 children 还有 default 什么都可以选，让它是 open。
那你添加你应该添加的是 close。
对，所以说我添加的
直接就是
我一边选是 open， 一边是 open 的，这边是选中我要改不改，这 边是 children， 这 children 我要选 children 的这边，我所有的都是 global。如果说我这边 children， 如果说我这边 children， 如果说我有一个是 open 的，我需要选它，那我这边我就不去 close 它，我等着我 check in 进来，我再去点它。
回档到一天。
哦，这样
这样就是省去我们所说的诸多。
就是在那个。
你相当于就是把 server 要做的给拆出来，拆到归里来做哈。
这个还是就
不是要拆到归里来，
不是要拆到。
你就是把 server 做的一些判断直接在归里展示出来了。
我就不需要，就是这就成了用户讨论，然后干展示，我就给你做功能。
这个号一旦创建，你这一生开头来卡。
其实是也实现了它要求，而且就
想起来有点
用户小会变了，你可以想去做它任何做的事情。
想一想，
真的很有道理。
不是他的 case 是吧？都是你自己想干嘛都不无视。
对，就是把那种蓝天白云给挤掉。
这边
没法跳过。
一直是开，一直是。但是你跳热点算不出来。
丢了。
不等车吗？
来了，
还是有可能，还是有。
带我回去。
对。
不是你们。
我1:20回去睡个午觉呗。
我以为你一个人来就不会开车。但是我觉得我。
my email? Found the problem.
Oh, I didn't get your email then.
I sent an email, it should have come to you. I sent a link to my Dropbox folder that has this code in it.
Okay.
So the problem was this. Here's what it took to make it compile. Go to the CPP part.
Okay.
Go to the client handler.
Client handler, okay.
Where's that?
厕所。
Find it. Have it open.
What Go had suggested, it might make it compile, but it won't work.
Yeah, that
It's
is
not
the
the right
same
thing to
thing.
work. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
Because what it does is it'll overwrite. Here's the client handler.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is in CPP
So,
line.
so here, wherever that's in the header file, that part where.
Yeah, yeah. I also
But
changed it.
anyway, you don't want to change it.
Yeah.
Just leave it. But here's the change you need in the client handler.
Operator.
This operator pass by value, not by reference. That's the only thing necessary to get rid of that.
Okay. Okay.
Pass by value, not by reference. Because what's happening is I'm passing the socket as a move.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not copyable. It's movable.
Yeah.
And it needs to be moved all the way down. And what happened? This guy, GCC, Windows are compiled fine, and it worked okay, but it really should be passed by value all the way. So that was the only problem.
So should I change it in Windows also?
If you want, I did it. In what's on the college server, I left it the way it is. But this summer I'll probably change it. Because you want one set of code for both of them.
Okay,
so anyway, that's that. Was this yours that I was looking at? I made a copy for you, and a copy for me, and a copy for Goo. Do you have the logger? Because there were a couple of changes in the logger to get it to compile. It wanted a constructor and destructor, and I just gave it the empty constructor and destructor for the logger. The static logger. Okay.
I will look into it.
Yeah.
So I'll make changes in Windows as well as.
Yeah, this right now, what I sent in that is the whole thing compiles and runs. In fact, you can see here on here.
Yeah, I saw the output.
And it's running. Those are other changes I had to make, just like you made, to get the right headers in. And IO control has to become IO,
We
pronounce it IO solid or whatever.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Okay. So then where should we?
I thought we did that on Friday. Let's do that on Friday, right?
Thursday.
I think scheduled on Thursday at 11:15. I thought I had scheduled on Friday. Come to my office. I'll bet I told Arpit to come on Friday, and I thought I told you too, but come at 11:15 to my office, because we definitely can do that. And we'll just find we'll find a company.